to get underway. And after some great weather that we've enjoyed all week in Japan, particularly at the TI circuit last week, for the first time we've got a wet track. And as you saw there from the pictures of John Alesi and Heinz Harald Frentzen, wet tyres are the order of the morning.
And indeed, that's a concern teams are going to have throughout the rest of this day as to whether we will have a wet Grand Prix or what we may anticipate more likely is a wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry race, because the weather forecast indicates showers throughout the day, and as soon as we get a drying track, and we had in fact a sign of a drying track about an hour and a half ago at Suzuka, but within the last 25 or so minutes rain has started to fall and it's been quite heavy. So the track is thoroughly wet, and every one of the 23 cars that will go out this morning will be on wet weather tyres, and find this Suzuka circuit another challenge to that they've faced over the previous 2 days.
Now, if you've been with us for the 2 days of qualifying so far, you'll know that there's been quite a lot of activity and drama associated with that qualifying. Michael Schumacher has taken pole position ahead of John Alesi. Mika Hakkinen and Damon Hill finds himself down in 4th place. Gerhard Berger 5th and David Coulthard 6th. But we also had a couple of fairly nasty accidents yesterday. Just flashing through the picture, through the marshal's legs there, you saw the McLaren Mercedes of Mark Blundell going out onto the circuit. And it's good to see that Mark will be driving today.
Yes, and Mark really had a very, very frightening accident out at the 130R. That's the quickest corner on the circuit. Inexplicably, he ran wide on the entry to the circuit on the right-hand side, got 2 wheels onto the grass. The car then went into a spin, but when it hit the gravel trap, it started to fly, and the car just swung round, and the nose of the car hit that tyre barrier at 90 degrees, and in fact, McLaren's have since looked at the data on the board of the car, and in fact, he hit the barrier, the tyre wall, at about 200 kilometers per hour, and there's something like 7G loading on impact. Massive, massive hit from Mark Blundell. Wisely, he chose not to run, in fact, in that qualifying session on Saturday afternoon, and went back to the hotel, got some much-needed rest. He's feeling sore, undoubtedly, but he will be here and running this morning and this afternoon.
The other major drama of that second qualifying session was the accident to Japanese driver Aguri Suzuki, a very hefty backwards impact into the tyre barrier just in front of the concrete wall. But we do have some news now on Aguri.
Yes, Aguri's got a fracture of the 4th left rib bone. That's on the back of his body. Minor contusion to the left lung, which is the result, really, of that rib fracture. There's no damage to the spinal cord. That's the medical report. And Dr. Murashima, the consultant surgeon in the Suzuka Central Hospital, has requested that Suzuki remain hospitalized for the next 3 days just to rest. So, sadly, for all the hundreds of thousands of Japanese fans here and those watching on TV in Japan, one of their heroes, Aguri Suzuki, will not be here.
Just the one Ligier Mugen in the race then this afternoon. Olivier Panis will be starting from 11th place on the grid and trying to uphold team honours as they do battle for, well, they've still got a chance of 4th place in the constructors' battle. Remember, it's all quite close between McLaren, Jordan, Sauber and Ligier. So this is an important race, and the hopes of the team will now rest solely on Olivier Panis. We've got Alesi's enjoying these wet conditions, as you can see, straight away, sliding that Ferrari around nicely. And a superb qualifying effort from him yesterday to qualify second. And just a little, well, I have to say a little bit behind Michael Schumacher. 8/10 was the gap in the end, because, of course, Michael Schumacher put in a blistering lap to finish off that second session.
Well, John Alesi was pretty special as well, and it was really in those last 3 corners, the 130R and that casino chicane, where Alesi all weekend has seemingly found time above everybody else. But in conditions like this, he just revels in allowing the car to run free and slide around. Getting very close to the edge, those white lines in these conditions can be treacherous, but the Frenchman just seems to love the feeling of a car. Really, this is a driver that should have been racing probably way back in the 1950s, when racing cars were very basic and crude. They're really all about an engine. The very sophisticated cars of the 90s, the passion involved is of a different level, and this is a man who has got passion by the brimful.
Just watch John Alesi in fine form. Look at him sliding that Ferrari, controlling it on the steering and the throttle. Great pictures as we go into the pit garage with Michael Schumacher and discussing some things with the team, perhaps a little bit about setup. Of course, the setup of the car changes for these wet conditions. Various changes made to help produce a little bit more downforce, try and get a little bit more performance from the wings to hold the car onto the road and try and squeeze its way through the water on the circuit.
Well, there's that very tricky casino chicane. You can see just how slippery it is when you put a wheel off the racetrack and onto that red and white curbing that bounds the racetrack. And Alesi's hands just flash from left to right and back again as he kept the car in control. And John Alesi's first flying lap, 2 minutes, 1 second, .238. Oh, he got the back of the car right. He had the lock on the lock stop, so he got it back. But just the conditions, the track isn't the wet we have expected and seen here in the past in Suzuka. It's that in-between sticky, slippery, greasy surface. And, of course, wet weather tyres, while they work extremely well, they do prefer some water to grab hold of and get a grip.
John Alesi, one of the stars of qualifying yesterday, but we just caught a quick glimpse of another of the stars of qualifying, Mika Häkkinen. And Häkkinen qualifying third fastest, his best qualifying to date apart from Spa this year. He was third also at Spa. Remember, at Spa, he threw away the chances perhaps of a podium finish by spinning on the very first lap coming out of La Source hairpin. But Mika Häkkinen in good form and ahead of both of the Williams.
And an interesting little comment was from his manager Didier Coulthard. He said that for the first time in Mika's Grand Prix career, they actually watched the Grand Prix live on Eurosport back in Monte Carlo, and it was a strange experience. They got a different perspective of Formula One racing, watching it on television, than they do, obviously, when they're here at the Grand Prix itself.
Look at Alesi, just sliding that back end, trying to get on the throttle, the back end of the car, moving around all the time, but it doesn't seem to worry him. As confident as ever, he just controls the slide, and he's coming up behind Heinz, Harald, Frentzen. John Alesi fastest, the only one, in fact, to have completed a lap so far, 2 minutes, 1 second. That's something like 23 seconds off the pace in the dry conditions.
So Frentzen and Alesi decide that they've done sufficient running to come back into the pits, and let's have a little look around the car. Well, John Alesi certainly clearly spirits very high indeed, and with weather like this, he must realistically see a chance of a second career victory, because in these conditions, he does really excel. In dry conditions, one has to say that Michael Schumacher, absolutely dominant throughout the two qualifying sessions, and to the frustration of everybody, he increased that gap between himself, certainly, and Damon Hill, who previously was the front row sharer with Michael Schumacher after Friday's qualifying. But to be 0.8 of a second quicker than your co-front row partner is an amazing achievement.
So Mika Häkkinen brings the McLaren Mercedes back into the pits, and certainly an uplift to the team, that qualifying performance. Didn't work out for the whole team, of course, with Mark Blundell. He'll be starting at the back of the grid, so the real two opposite ends of the spectrum, with Blundell not completing a flying lap yesterday in qualifying. He didn't go out in qualifying at all, and that was because he really wasn't feeling up to it after that accident in the morning. But he will be starting right at the back behind Roberto Moreno and Bertrand Gachot, and he's going to have a fair bit of work to do to work his way up to where he should be inside the top 10.
Oh, Damon Hill, I was just about to say, a Rennmeister here last year. But again, just showing you how tricky the exit of that casino chicane is. Just look at the throttle, and the back end swings out to the right. As Damon Hill goes on to start his first flying lap, he's only been out on that parade lap behind Ukio Katayama. And now through this series of long swings left and right, culminating at the very top of that long left-hand Dunlop curve. And here, so important not to put your wheels over the curbing. We've seen what happens in a low-speed section of circuit, and it will only be worse if you do it here.
Damon said after qualifying yesterday that nobody could be more disappointed than himself and the team after their performance, ending up fourth fastest. He was driving with a new chassis, new monocoque. It had been changed overnight, in fact, and one of the problems they did come up with was that one of the fuel pumps wasn't working as effectively as it should do, which meant that they had to run a little bit more fuel in the car than would be ideal in qualifying trim. But nonetheless, disappointed to end up in fourth place, and of course with his main rival Michael Schumacher on pole position, and the constructors' battle very, very important here this weekend.
But also, I think for Damon Hill personally, facing the fact of being behind Jean Alesi on the grid, and we saw how long it took Damon to deal with Alesi back 1 week ago in the Pacific Grand Prix. To have to face that battle, the prospect of a battle all over again, is somewhat disappointing. And to be again a second slower than Michael Schumacher, in fact, to rely on your time from Friday qualifying bearing in mind the difficulties that he faced with that replacement chassis that he had to step into on Saturday. So a lot of work indeed for Damon Hill and David Coulthard if they are to retain the World Constructors' Championship for Williams-Renault.
David Coulthard saying yesterday that he felt they'd gone a little bit the wrong way on setup with the cars. They're trying to run the cars a little stiffer, but obviously they went away from the sort of setup that's been so successful for them in the last few Grand Prix, and perhaps that hurt them in the end in that second qualifying session. Well, wet weather conditions, we've had a few damp Grand Prix this year, and to be honest, John, most of those damp Grand Prix have sometimes produced the best races.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that Grand Prix that start wet and gradually go to dry produce stunning races, even in qualifying. Well, Damon Hill certainly coping pretty well so far. He's actually up to second quickest. He's just 3/4 of a second slower than John Alesi. So the changes and the work that the Williams team carried out last night to find improvement in grip and general drivability seems to have paid dividends.
Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, and we would expect perhaps from past performances to see the Williams a little bit more comfortable in these conditions. The Benetton always appears to be that little stiffer and harder on the circuit, and perhaps more prone to sliding around in the wet. On board with Rubens Barrichello, a nice view of that S series of corners going up behind the pits. You can see how it climbs up fairly steeply and just seems to be going from one to the other all the time.
And just listen to the engine note. Occasionally you hear the engine rev suddenly leap upwards, and that's just simply the lack of traction and wheel spin. So prudent throttle use absolutely vital. Now this long Dunlop curve, and down 2 gears into the first part of Degner. This is a corner we've seen so many cars go off on Friday and on Saturday. Then in the second part, then under the crossover, and back to Michael Schumacher coming up to complete his first flying lap. And it's interesting that a lot of people are trying to stay away from those red and white markings at the side of the track as possible, because it does deflect the car very badly indeed.
So John Alesi fastest, but Michael Schumacher goes immediately second fastest, and the difference just thousandths of a second. So much for the car not working so well in these conditions. It seems to be working perfectly wet or dry, sliding it there as you could see.
Well, what Michael Schumacher did, either by accident or design, he found himself taking the wider arc in that first corner again. Look, just touched the throttle, the back steps out. So it's really tricky conditions that you have to be at all times completely on top of. But Damon Hill, the man who has gone quickest, has done precisely that.
So Damon Hill, yes, has just grabbed the top time from Alesi, Schumacher, Gerhard Berger, David Coulthard and Olivier Panis. Welcome back to the warm-up here from Suzuka in preparation for the Japanese Grand Prix. Rubens Barrichello winds his way through the chicane, plunges down towards start-finish. 8th fastest at the moment. Let's just see if there's any improvement for the young Brazilian. Well, he goes 7th fastest. But it's still Damon Hill fastest at the moment from John Alesi, Michael Schumacher, Gerhard Berger, Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard.
And just during that commercial break, we saw the rain start to fall again heavier than we had some 15 minutes ago when this session began. And the young Brazilian, disappointing qualification for him, 10th quickest. The Irvine teammate 7th, but the gap between them was significant. So Rubens Barrichello, usually races are the point where his strength seemed to come through more clearly. And starting 10th, if conditions are like this, may well in some respects be not the worst place to be. With Jean Alesi, Michael Schumacher in the front row, Mika Hakkinen and Damon Hill the second row, and Berger and Coulthard in the third. For sure at the front there will be a logjam going into the first turn, and then through that whole sequence of lefts and rights up to the highest point of the circuit.
Mika Hakkinen 5th fastest, as you can see. And interesting to hear some of the comments after qualifying yesterday. Remember, Mika Hakkinen was the first one out onto the circuit after the red flag halt. Well, apparently the team realised that he was going to be brought into the weighbridge because of the way that the system works. They realised that he would have to be brought in. So that was part of the reason for him going out on old tyres, doing just one lap and being brought in straight away, was so that there was time to get him onto the weighbridge, get that all sorted out, put the new tyres on, and then go for a quick lap at the end. So good bit of team organisation.
Well, that's part of what makes teams like McLaren and all the Williams and Benetton so good. It's not simply just because they've got a fast car or a fast driver. You've got to work the system to your advantage. And as Eddie Jordan was explaining in the the round 5 table meeting that takes place on Friday afternoon. The step from where he and the Jordan Grand Prix team are to be in the top 3 is as big a step as it's taken Eddie Jordan and his team to get to where they are now. And it's not just a physical step, it's a massive financial commitment, and not easy to do.
So Mika Häkkinen seems to be enjoying himself in these conditions. Of course, the physical side a little easier in the wet, but Mika seems to be very well recovered from the appendix operation of a couple of weeks ago. He's been out for a run most mornings. I don't know if he's been out for a run this morning because it's a very early start, but both days of qualifying he was up running at about 6 o'clock in the morning and just getting himself into the mood. Still suffering a little bit yesterday from the jet lag. Remember, he hasn't had a week to adapt like most of the other drivers to the change in time zones, but it certainly didn't seem to affect him in yesterday's qualifying.
No, and in fact, I think that 3-week rest that he has had has benefited him overall. And we mentioned on Friday just such a high work rate that Mika Häkkinen hardly has a day when he's not in a car. And if he does have those free days, then, of course, they're used for promotional activities. So that 3-week layoff, I think, has given him great return of enthusiasm and momentum and maybe simply passion as well.
Harald Frentzen's gone 4th, and you can see why just watching those pictures. Harald really on the case, sliding it right out to the very edge of the circuit, and one to watch if conditions stay the same as this, with his extensive experience of this circuit from his days racing in Japanese 3000. You can see there sliding in, but perhaps not losing too much time in these conditions by taking that wider line.
Well, it was almost like a rally driver preparing to turn into a hairpin bend corner. He got in the car, sort of went sideways just to turn in, sort of chattered its way to a speed where he then could get the grip and continue through that hairpin corner. But this is Mika Häkkinen making his way up through those series of curves that form the S's behind the pits. And again, staying away. Well, he's just riding that right front slightly over the curbs. Mika Häkkinen probably amongst the quickest of reaction of Grand Prix drivers. And really, when McLaren and Mercedes-Benz finally get a car to match the speed of Häkkinen, that combination really will be one to challenge for Grand Prix victory.
Damon Hill still fastest at the moment, though, from John Alesi and Michael Schumacher. Those three absolutely tied together by 1/10 of a second. That's all that separate the top three, and that's pretty remarkable in these conditions. Eddie Irvine has come up to 5th, taking a quick look at the Irishman, and a good performance again from him in qualifying to end up 7th fastest, one of those to improve on his time yesterday, and much happier with the car, but looking for a reliable run to the flag this afternoon to try and score some valuable points for the team.
And there's this battle going on between McLaren, Jordan and Sauber. Ligier probably a little bit more out of it as the result of Aguri Suzuki not being able to compete here today. So with Irvine and Frentzen sharing the 4th row of the grid, they've got to look 2 rows to get up to Mika Häkkinen. And we thought the first 3 will be pretty exciting. Well, I think if you add in the 4th row with Heinz, Harald, Frentzen and Eddie Irvine, well, we've got a pretty exciting prospect in the early laps.
Just to remind you, Jordan and Sauber are actually tied for the moment on 18 points in the Constructors' battle, but they're only 3 points behind McLaren. That's just how close the battle for 4th place is in the championship. Remember, up front, Benetton have quite a comfortable lead, a 23-point lead at the moment over Williams, and they could wrap up the Constructors' title today.
Well, good news for Mark Blundell. He is out on the track. He's now completed 6 laps, and his time 11th quickest. And, of course, after a massive accident like his on Saturday, it will be just a little bit of reacclimatization, just getting accustomed to the fields and the character of that McLaren chassis. And in difficult conditions, look at John Alesi just climbing over the curbs and slides all the way down through that long dropping right-hand corner. And again, Alesi puts himself quickest as Damon Hill. Now he comes up to complete another lap. This will be his 7th lap. Damon Hill uses a little bit less of the curb than Alesi, but can he get the traction? Can he get the grip off that chicane? John Alesi's time just under 0.3 of a second faster than Damon Hill's previous quickest. And Damon Hill has gone and done precisely the same back to Alesi, but by a massive 0.8 of a second.
Damon Hill looking very good once again in the slippery conditions here. Remember that drive of his here last year, one of his greatest ever drives, taking the win by just 3 seconds. It was a stopped race, if you remember. They all had to come back to the grid. We had a sudden, very heavy shower. We saw cars spinning off on the start-finish straight. It really got quite messy, but a tremendous climax to the race.
Well, one of the races I think that will go down as being Damon Hill's race record, probably the outstanding Grand Prix win. Clearly the most difficult of conditions, and this Suzuka circuit parts were very, very fast indeed, and just run close as he and Schumacher were doing throughout the race. Really a testament to the skill of both drivers, equally a testament to their commitments.
A little wide through the second of the right-handers there, Damon Hill, but that shouldn't have cost him too much time.
And Harald Frentzen has improved again. He's gone third quickest, and that puts him one spot ahead of Michael Schumacher.
Interesting to see that. Frentzen has been suffering a little bit from lack of track time this weekend because he's had a couple of engines let go on him during the free practice sessions, and so that's a good effort considering how little testing time he's had to change the car. But of course in the wet conditions everything different with the car anyway. So at the moment it's Hill from Alesi, Frentzen third, Schumacher fourth, but he's only done 5 laps so far. Eddie Irvine fifth. Johnny Herbert's come up to 6th place, then Gerhard Berger 7th. Mika Häkkinen's dropped down to 8th, then it's David Coulthard, Rubens Barrichello, Mark Blundell, and Ukio Katayama is rounding out the top 12. We've had most of them out on circuit. We're missing a couple so far. Try and work out who they are.
Well, one, of course, will be Gori Suzuki, who will be sitting back in his hospital bed, and I'm sure that fractured rib he has will start to give him some jip, because broken ribs, not uncommon, not necessarily from accidents as such, but in the past when seats have not been made as well as they ought to be, they can just nip a rib, and in the course of a Grand Prix, well, I've certainly had a fracture as a result of a poorly fitting seat. Eddie Irvine comes up to compete. Well, there's going to be his 7th lap, and very careful, judiciously through that casino chicane, accelerates downhill, lets the car run out as wide as he can, and try and keep it in as straight a line as possible. So Irvine 2 minutes 019.57, 5th quickest.
Still Hill fastest though, as we go through with 6.5 minutes of the warm-up to go. Welcome back live here on Eurosport to the warm-up from Japan, and for all the Eurosport fans enjoying the evening entertainment, well, you've got an early start tomorrow to watch the race live, of course. It's with the clock changing. It's a very early start, but I do hope you will be able to join us live for the race itself. What's going on at the moment? Well, Damon Hill is still fastest from John Alesi. Heinz Frentzen is third, and the driver you're looking at now, the pole position sitter, Michael Schumacher, is down in 4th place, but he's coming around to complete a lap through the chicane he comes. Well, we've been joined in the commentary box this morning by a voice that, to those of you who go to Formula One races, if you go to Silverstone or to other European Grand Prix, will be very familiar to you. Bob Costenduris. Good morning, Bob. Welcome to Eurosport.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. It's very nice to be in here. Very nice to see you guys at work and seeing how Eurosport does it.
Well, you've been very helpful to us over the course of these 2 Japanese races. Now, of course, normally you would be up in the main commentary box doing the commentating for the Grand Prix for all the thousands of fans who come along to each and every race. So why aren't you up there today?
Well, they just reckon that there's not that many Europeans here to appreciate an English language commentary, and consequently they've made me redundant, as it were, for these 2 Japanese Grand Prix. I have done them in the past, actually. They gave me my own radio station here, which is very kind of them and a good way of doing it. But there doesn't seem to be the money these days or whatever, and so they've said, sorry chap, but no work. They've got a sort of Japanese commentator who speaks English in a sort of disco way, which largely, so I'm told, renders him mainly incomprehensible.
I heard it a little bit this morning as we walked over, and I thought to myself, that does sound just like a DJ. He's sort of really wow, you know, and it's got the American accent as well. But anyway, I don't know how many of the fans actually hear that. Now, you've been coming to Japan for many, many years now. How does the sort of crowd that we see here this morning compare with what you've seen in the past? Just to let everyone know, by the way, as you can see from the classification, that Schumacher has gone 2nd fastest now, and you can see he's sliding that Benetton around with a true style, almost in Alesi sort of style there, Schumacher coming round. But Bob, how does the crowd compare with what you've seen in the past?
Well, I'm a little disappointed at the moment. I think it could well fill up later. There seem to be a lot of people outside the circuit, not necessarily that many inside the circuit. But I think it could well fill up. We usually see the most enormous crowd, and they have actually said that they've had something like 125,000 over the last couple of days. So they still obviously reckon it's a huge crowd, but it certainly doesn't look that big at the moment. But I'm sure that the weather conditions are probably meaning that people are staying under cover and in the shelter and perhaps having some breakfast or something like that. And it's just that it's taking a little time to fill up because of the weather.
It's quite a different atmosphere here, isn't it, to the circuit, the Ida circuit that we were at last weekend. I mean, obviously there's more people, but there is also, with this wonderful circuit, there's a sort of a sense of the history of the place as well. He's dashing around a bit, isn't he? Oh, he's leaping from spare car into his race car. And, of course, with only 1 minute 41 to go, he's got to be a bit smartish about it. But as I say, the atmosphere is quite different here.
Yes, very much so. I mean, this is a big, big event. There are people queuing outside in the morning. Last night, as we left the circuit, there were already people queuing to get in this morning, which is absolutely extraordinary. The streets around the circuit, the roads, they're packed with cars, with people sleeping in their cars, people thronging the shops. It's extraordinary. You really have a sense of a happening, a great event.
David Coulthard is now third fastest, so Damon Hill still quite fastest at the moment by 0.3 of a second over Michael Schumacher, who's trying to get out before the pit lane closes, and he will get out, but I don't think he'll get one lap in, but I think he'll be back in, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen's off. Heinz-Harald Frentzen there into the Sauber has come off somewhere around the circuit. Difficult to tell exactly where that is.
Difficult to tell, but one thing is for sure, the front of the nose has been damaged, and that's going to frustrate the Sauber team, who really would just hope to have been able to bring that car back from the track and simply clean it off and give it a final race check. There it is, out at the Dunlop curve, a corner we saw last year. Martin Brundle, we mentioned in earlier broadcast, he had a massive off there in the Grand Prix, and that's the Dunlop curve, that long, long uphill blind apex, swing wide and then cut back in again. Let's have a look and see. There he is. Oh, Heinz-Harald. Oh, and they've had about 4 or 5 fairly substantial accidents over the weekend, and that one again sees a car flying, and part of the cause for that seems to be the way that the raking of those gravel beds. It's enabling cars, because it hits it as a wave, it hits the first one and it flies, and of course, being a flat bottom car, once you get air under it, of course, it's very difficult for that air to escape without ballooning the car up into the air.
2 cars that came round, as you saw on that overhead shot a moment ago, almost got themselves into trouble as they slowed down for the incident itself. But Frentzen still 5th fastest. There is the checkered flag. Damon Hill still fastest. 1 or 2 cars still out, David Coulthard included. That's who we're looking at the moment. He's third, just a couple of tenths behind Michael Schumacher. Very, very evenly matched. But what you have to say is that Williams Renault are looking stronger in these conditions relative to Benetton Renault, although Schumacher's still right up there. The gap between them much closer.
Yeah, well, Schumacher's hopped from one into the other at the last moment just to make any decisions or any clarifications he wants. I think about basic setups. I suspect Benetton have done 2 things with each car, and whereas Damon Hill and David Coulthard have just spent the time essentially in their prime race cars gaining more track time and just running. Damon Hill's completed 10 laps, and David Coulthard is now on to his 10th lap. So information for Benetton is about which car, which setup they think is the right way to go. For Williams, they're just spending time giving the drivers the opportunity to run on the wet track. But clearly Williams have made progress overnight and may well have just reverted back to a more tested and proven setup, one that in the past we've seen this car clearly outshine everyone else.
Well, the conditions are that much wetter now, and so no improvement in time. You can see the amount of water that's coming off the back of David Coulthard's Williams, and that last lap was a 2:02 compared to his 2:0 that he'd done previously. So conditions worsening as we go through this warm-up, and as it comes to its conclusion, Damon Hill ends up fastest, and that'll be a nice little confidence boost for him after the problems of yesterday and not managing to get beyond the second row of the grid. So Hill, Schumacher, Coulthard, Alesi 4th fastest, then Frentzen ends up with a 5th fastest time, but a rather damaged Sauber. Eddie Irvine 6th, Gerhard Berger 7th. He had a little bit of an off earlier on in this session, but managed to get back onto the track. Johnny Herbert 8th, Mika Hakkinen 9th, and a good performance from the hero here, especially with Agiri Suzuki out of action. Ukyo Katayama, He's ended up 10th fastest.
Yes, and I also say a very good performance from Mark Blundell in 11th place, and Mark Blundell just 0.2 of a second slower than Mika Häkkinen, and after a shunt of that magnitude on Saturday, I think that's an outstanding drive from Mark Blundell, and will go a long way to help restore his confidence and self-belief come the Grand Prix.
Well, there you can see the top 10 places, and Damon Hill heading the list for the first time this weekend. Mark Blundell 11th, then Panis, Lamy, Mika Salo, Rubens Barrichello down in 15th, Luca Badoa, Carl Wendlinger, then Gianni Morbidelli, Andrea Montermini and Taki Inoue, and just Gasho and Denise after them. We never saw Roberto Moreno out on the circuit at all. I don't quite know what the problem is. We'll try and find out before the Grand Prix this afternoon. And the other car not out, of course, Agiri Suzuki, and we wish Agiri Suzuki well for a quick recovery. Of course, Martin Brundle due to be out in that Ligier come Adelaide. So the warm-up's over, and we now have a bit of a gap until the race begins at 1 o'clock local time.
Well, the gods here in Japan have played their joker by bringing rain to the Suzuka circuit, and scenes reminiscent of 1 year ago. And I have to think that no one can wish to see a race start in these conditions. I doubt they've very much choice.
So a 53-lap Grand Prix coming up. If the conditions are like this, it should be quite something. Please join us later. For now, it's goodbye.